within the developer relationships department, if I can say. And so Ajuna is going to be talking to us about the various roles in tech. So take it away, Ajuna. I'm really excited to have you here.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. Like Adebisi said, my name is Ajuna. I currently work in developer relations at Datadog, and I'll be talking to you about finding the right role in tech. So starting off a little bit about me. So Adebisi mentioned I used to be a program manager with Africode. I currently am a mentor. I've been with Africode for over 3 years now, maybe close to 4. Before this, I used to work as both a software engineer and a site reliability engineer at Google. And I'm originally from Dar es Salaam, though I lived in New York for a little while, and now I live in Atlanta in the US. So to get started, I just want to talk a little bit about careers. Generally, when you're still in college or you're still getting started, you really think of careers as kind of being unilateral in one direction, right? The real truth of it is that there's going to be a lot of turns. It doesn't really go in a straight line. You might have to make lateral changes where you'll stay in the same position, but you'll try something different. But it can also be really easy to stay in roles for a really long time. I think traditionally we give a lot of credit to people who've been at their roles for 15, 20 years. I know my mom has been at her role for 25 years. It's really quite common for her generation, but it's getting to a place where it's a lot more common to swap roles every couple of years to find something that'll work better for you. Also, once you get started with full-time, I think it's one of the first times in your life when you're working and meeting a lot of people at different life stages. Usually when you're still in school, you're usually with your age group, your peer group. You might have a couple outliers of folks who maybe started early or started a little later, but generally you're all going in the same direction where you're trying to complete the goal. The other also weird thing about careers is what you do and what someone else does at another company might have a completely different title, which can make things a little bit weird, right? Like my actual title at Datadog is technical evangelist, which sounds a little strange, but it's also called developer relations, developer advocate, developer evangelist. When I was hired, like looking for this role, those were all titles I applied to, and it can be a little weird to kind of balance that out. Another weird thing is when you graduate, there's no set path of what you're supposed to do, right? Everyone tells you get your degree, your BA at least, and then you get that. And then you're like, okay, what next? I have friends who go directly in the workforce. I have friends who maybe take a break and do something different. There are people who go in and do another degree immediately. There are people who work then go do another degree. You might have other life things that pop up. It's very challenging to see, like compare yourself to your age mates the way you did when you were like younger, when you're like, okay, I'm 16, I should be in Form 4 or Form 5 or 10th grade or 11th grade. Like it was a lot easier to do that. They had like these age gaps that you were supposed to fall into. But then you're like 22 and you're just like, I'm qualified to do a lot of different things. What do I want to do? So you kind of choose what you think is best and what you think is successful for you based on what you like and what you want to do, where you want to go. But it can also be really tricky to have transitions from one thing to another, right? Everything is very vague. You don't really know what you're going into. You kind of hope for the best. So I wanted to chat about my career path. So starting off, I graduated in 2017 from a computer science major from a school in the US called Grinnell. It's based in Iowa. But before that, I did things with my various summers trying to build up experience. So I worked as a system administrator for my local computer science department at school, which was really cool. I got a chance to learn a little bit more about systems. And then when I was a second year, that following summer, I interned as a software engineering intern at Twitter. And then the following summer, I interned at Google, and that was the summer before I graduated. So I was able to turn that into a full-time position. Google has a program that helps interns do that. So I graduated. Once I graduated, I started off as a site reliability engineer, working on Google's internal virtual machine team, where we provided virtual machines to other people at Google. And then I was like, this isn't what I thought it was, you know. I tried to mix my sysadmin background and my software engineering background. SWE is software engineer, so SWE. I tried to mix them both, and it's usually SRE is the right mix for that, but it just didn't work out well for me. But I enjoyed what I was doing. But so I was like, okay, it's been about a year and a half. I know I don't like this. Let me try something a little bit different. And I'll talk a little bit about what caused that. So I decided to try software engineering, and I switched to another team internally at Google to work on Google Maps. I worked on Google Maps notifications, and that team changed a lot while I was on it. So I also want to say that sometimes without you wanting change to happen, it'll happen. I worked on different projects. My project got moved to different parts of the world. When COVID hit, they decided that they wanted us to work on something different. Like everything just kind of kept changing. So after doing that for over 2 years, I decided that I wanted to try something different. I didn't like software engineering as much. So I looked at what I wanted to do next, and that's what led me to developer relations at Datadog. So one thing I want to talk about first is like when you're in school, especially doing a CS degree, which I assume most folks here are, there aren't that many opportunities that hit you as like available to you. We have had various talks on Africode X before about the different career opportunities that you can do. So you can go watch those, including data science. We talked a little bit with an SRE. We talked to someone who does research, and kind of those I think are a little bit more known. But here's a chart that I got from Free Code Camp. It's about alternative career paths for folks who have like a CS background. And as you can see, there's tons of different options. So there are, this chart, I think I made a slight mistake. The axes have names and I can't see those. So like on the left, it says if you want to be more technical and less people focused. And then on the right, it's more people focused and less like hard, like focused tech, right? You're more so trying to make things work better for people, rather on the left, you're trying to make things better work for systems. That's kind of like a rough outline. But as you can see, there are tons of different things that you can do. You can be a teacher, and there are tons of people who do go into that. Your CS professors, for example. You can be a recruiter. We've mostly interacted with those if you've applied for a role. Dev role is on the bottom left, right of this chart. Sysadmin is on the top left of this chart. And I've tried both of those, right? We can kind of think of the centers maybe being software engineer. So there's tons of options out there, and I'll chat a little bit about what each role does. So starting with software engineers, this is kind of what your day-to-day looks like, right? When I was a software engineer, kind of comparing to other people who've also done software engineering that I've talked to. So primarily you're doing software development, you're coding, you're writing documentation for the code you wrote, you're testing it, you're releasing it, you're debugging things that come up. If you're trying to write a new feature, you're writing a design doc or like a reference doc about what you want to do and getting it approved by folks on your team. It's very feature driven, right? You're trying to do something new. So when I worked on Google Maps, I was like trying to release new features for folks who were using Google Maps, right, as a software engineer. Depending on what you do, there are lots of opportunities on the project, depending on your interest and skill set. So there's different languages that you can do. I was mostly a backend engineer. So I worked mostly doing things like connecting systems together, right? Parsing information from one system to the other. But you can do more front-end stuff, which I admire folks who do front-end. I think making things more accessible to people is very important, and I'm not as good at it. You can be full stack and do a little bit of both or connect the two. You can go to data. There are software engineers on my team who focused mostly on creating data pipelines. And then we had data engineers that worked on like fixing those and analyzing the data from those, right? Other things data engineers could do is like create experiments so that you can compare when you create software, different experiences for users. That's something my team did a lot. And then another thing about software engineers is you're rarely on call. There are exceptions to this. If you're on a larger team, you might be rarely on call because you might have a site reliability engineering team who's on call for you. But unless you're on a small team, if you're the one who wrote all the code and there's no other engineer, then of course you're on call to make sure that if something goes wrong, you fix it. If there's no support team, usually you're the one on call. But in larger companies, they start to separate those roles out. So I'll talk about site reliability engineering, which maybe some of you haven't heard about. So site reliability engineers are software engineers that focus on systems and making sure they keep working. So for example, reliability is one of the most important features of a system. You can add as many shiny things and as many cool things to a system to make sure that they work. If no one can access your system, there's no use, right? Everyone expects systems like Google to always be available. How many of us have gone to google.com to check that our internet is working, right? Like people expect a certain level of availability, and site reliability engineers focus on that. They do a lot of proactive and reactive engineering to make large scale systems better. So at Google, SREs and software engineers do about the same work, but it's just the focus is a bit different. So they're also coding. A lot of them do have either a software engineering background like I did or a site or systems background, but we all coded, we all wrote unit tests, we all did reviews to make sure our things worked correctly. There were coding standards just as they are in software engineering, but the things that we coded were more like configurations. But we were still writing design docs, we're still writing documentation. But we were working on making sure that the system worked correctly, right? So the types of things that the projects I got were like creating a monitoring system, automating things to make it easier, really focused on releasing software rather than writing, like releasing features rather than writing the features, right? We worked with software engineering teams, and there was very little front end to do. You could say if there was software engineering, it was all back end, right? We were building tools to manage systems, and we were building systems that were being managed by those tools. It's a really cool job. It can also be called DevOps if you've heard of the operations, but there's a lot of cool opportunities there. The reason I swapped from SRE is because I didn't want to get better at developing systems. Like I fell into the role in some ways. And I was just like, this doesn't really fit that well with the things I want to do. I wanted to make systems like software that works for humans rather than making systems work better. And SREs mostly work on making systems work better. It helps humans, but it's like 4 or 5 steps removed, right? So I was just like, this doesn't work for me. But it's a really cool role. There's amazing people. I would say some of the most helpful people I've encountered in tech have been SREs. So the next role I want to talk about is what I do now, which is developer relations. And I want to preface this by saying that developer relations depends on where you are. It does a lot of different things. What I do is a lot of giving talks like this one. I like talking to people and public speaking. We do still write software, but a lot of our software that we write is open source. It's usually creating new integrations between your system and creating use cases. So for example, one of the projects that I could do is I work at Datadog. It's a monitoring platform that other engineers use. So I could create a new integration between Datadog and Kubernetes to work better for folks who release their software with Kubernetes, right? Or I could create a Java application and show you how you can instrument it with Datadog. Those are the types of projects that I work on. They're very different. I'm not helping make the software that Datadog releases better directly. I'm not writing that software, but I'm trying to influence it in some ways by trying to see examples of how to use it, make it easier for the developers who use Datadog to have a better experience. That's my job. Another part of that is just community management, right? So talking to the community that uses Datadog, finding out what are the things that they don't like, what are the things that they like, what are the cool things that they've done, and helping them. If like someone maybe who uses Datadog already has made an integration with Kubernetes that does something really cool, I could work with them to make that more accessible to all the other people that use Datadog, right? Those are the types of things that I want to work on. Getting feedback from the community and giving it back to Datadog is basically my number one job. And that's why I do all these other things, like going to talks and stuff. Part of that is also content creation. So I have to make YouTube videos, blogs, some people do streaming, just to interact with the community, show you how you do things and so forth. A lot of developer relations folks work on companies that do software as a service, right? Like who provide software to other developers. And usually you're the voice of the community of developers. Some things to consider here. Generally, your experience will be different from almost everyone around you. Even if you did the exact same thing I did with the exact same internships, with the exact same roles and stuff like that, your experience will be different because timing matters, right? Because of timing mattering, luck can feel like it's being involved. You also do have to be prepared, but things have to be available, right? Like there were roles that I couldn't get just because there was no availability for them to hire me, right? Even if I was qualified, there's some things that can just go wrong. The other thing that does play a huge part in your career is just your personal circumstances. There were choices that I made that were influenced by just the things that were affecting me. Where do I want to live? If I wanted to live in New York, I had to look for roles that were in New York, which might have excluded roles that I weren't in New York, right? Google, when I was at Google, it's a large company. There are just projects that were just available in one part. If I wanted to work on projects related to Africa, I might have to be in Africa. Or they also had a large group of people who were working on it in like the Bay Area, but I wasn't in the Bay. So it was like all of those things influence the types of opportunities that come your way. I also want to talk about immigration. I am from Tanzania. I am not an American. So coming to the US and working here means that I was very much influenced by where my work visa allowed me to work. So I definitely took that into consideration when I was looking for roles. If I got other offers, I probably would still pick Google because they had a lot of support from me immigration-wise. Other things, your family situation probably matters. If you already have children, you probably have to make a decision. You can't just move from one part of the country or the world to another. And then obviously also other goals, right? If you want to be a founder, starting off as a startup makes sense. Those are all things that will influence your career trajectory. But something that also happens is tech changes all the time. Developer relations as a career did not exist about 5 years ago. People were doing it, but it didn't have a title that easily, right? There were some people who did it and it looks very different than it looks now. Actually, some people might have had the title, but as a field, it's actively growing right now. So that's also something that I couldn't have started off in DevRel because for a lot of the places I was looking at, it wasn't an opportunity that existed the way it is now. Also, with COVID, no one expected that. People are a lot more remote friendly now. You couldn't get a remote position, basically, especially as a new grad, you couldn't do it. Whereas now it could be possible. You also don't know where things will go for the same realm. So there are going to be opportunities that pop up that you may not expect, and especially as you grow. So when I was at Google, I looked at other roles that I wanted to do and I realized that I wanted to do something different from software engineering. But there were some roles that just weren't available to you until you got to a particular level in your career. You couldn't be a manager until you were a senior engineer. Specifically at Google, I couldn't swap to trying out things like product management because it was only open to people at not entry level, like one promotion up from that. So I couldn't, when I was still looking around, swap to that until I got promoted, right? There are other interesting projects to solve that just aren't available to you until you have a certain level of skill set or background. You can also always change your mind. So I do appreciate trying out software engineering because I wanted to be more people focused, but I realized that it wasn't right for me maybe 6 months in, right? But I stuck with it because I wanted to learn software engineering a little bit more. And also there were other opportunities available to me post software engineering. So I changed my mind pretty fast, but then you kind of figure out what does your next move look like. I want to talk a little bit about like what I've written here about picking what makes the most sense of you with your markers of success and your skill set. So I took a lot of time to figure out what do I want to do in terms of what is interesting to me. What are the types of things that I want to, types of skills that I want to develop. I wanted to be better at figuring out how to make systems work better for people. I wanted to be a manager. I wanted to work with people, manage people. I really liked public speaking. I thought that it was an idea of success, being able to share your knowledge with other people. I've always thought it was really cool. I actually wanted to be a teacher at some point, and I thought the reason I wanted to be that is I think the idea of sharing information is really cool. So public speaking kind of gave me that without having to be responsible for someone's education, right? Like being grading and stuff for all things I did not want to do. But I was like, oh, I like this about this career. While I was already engineering, I was already trying to give talks. Whenever Google wanted to send someone to give a talk, I was one of the first people to raise my hand. I was already interested in mentoring other people, and like, because I wanted to be a manager, right? I was already interested in going to conferences and recruiting and all of that stuff. And so I had to think, okay, where does all of this fit together? I wanted to be a manager, but I know I can't be a manager until I'm maybe more of a senior engineer. So I'm like, okay, let's put that in like my 5-year plan. But what are the skill sets that I could learn right now that can lead me there? What are the things that I think make successful managers, and how can I learn from them? Okay, mentoring will make me successful. Let me do mentoring now. I already have an interest for it. Coaching is something managers do. Can I do a coaching certification? Public speaking is something I'm already doing. Can I make that a part of my job rather than writing features being the main part of my job and I keep running away to go give talks, right? How do I make all of this fit together? Made sense to me. Good mentorship and sponsorship can make a difference. And what I mean here by mentorship is having someone you can talk to. It can be a peer. More likely, it might be someone who has a path that's similar to you, maybe who looks like you, who's done the work, who can give you advice on what you can do next. Managers make great mentors as well. Great managers make good mentors. There can be bad managers. But I still have a mentor who was my first manager at Google. Like, he's someone I talk to all the time. I just met up with him last month and caught him up on what I'm doing. You can really build relationships there, and it can really make a difference. And he's the one who helped me realize that even though I had a great support team in SRE, I wanted to do something different. What I describe here is sponsorship. Sponsors are people who have power of some kind. Usually they can upgrade you, to use Beyonce lyrics, right? So they are able to put their reputation, or they are able to say, hey, this person's good at this thing. I've worked with them before. I've seen them work. Let's give them an opportunity. Those are sponsors. Sponsors can make a huge difference. If you have someone who can take a chance on you, it really makes a difference. Usually you have a pre-existing relationship, but you might not even, before I dove into DevRel, I talked to a bunch of people about what it looks like internally at Google, externally at Google. And I was just like, what can I do? And the people who were able to say, okay, you can come try it out with me or talk to me about that. There are people who did want to hire me in DevRel because of just us talking. I would consider those sponsors. But the position that I got, I applied externally after a while, right? The other thing is that all experience teaches you something. I don't regret the path that I took in any way, even if I've not gone forward in any of these careers. For example, right now my developer relations job, I talk about site reliability engineering. And I couldn't have done that unless I started off in site reliability engineering, even though I knew I didn't want to be an SRE after doing that for a year and a half. My experience in software engineering is helpful in my career right now because I'm still coding. I have the experience of someone who is a developer, right? And all the other things that I haven't done also still matter. I wanted to be a PM. I looked into the path. I talked to PMs. It wasn't available to me. And eventually I realized it doesn't fit for me. Knowing that that path doesn't work for me is helpful to me because now I'm not going to be, okay, can I still be a PM in the future? Maybe, but right now that path does not look viable to me and what I want to do. And there are tons of other opportunities out there, and other things will also open up as things sort of change in my life. I'm currently very early in my developer relations career and I really like it, but it might be possible I want to change something different, maybe focus on a different part of it. Developer marketing, maybe, I doubt it, but that's also an opportunity for folks who go from developer relations. Sales is also a very possible avenue, but I'm not sure that works for me either. Being a manager is also an avenue, which is the one I'm currently planning to go into. If I, after a couple promotions, I think it's just 1 or 2 away at this point. All of this is going to teach me something that'll make it a little bit easier for folks going forward. So yeah, I also want to take some questions and see if there are folks who we can chat about more specific parts of my career if you want to, or decisions that I made. But right now I am open to questions.
Thank you so much, Ajuna. Can you hear me, by the way?
I can.
All right, perfect. No, thank you. This was so helpful. I'm driving right now. My husband's listening. He also found your talk really helpful. My question, I guess, for you, if I can just start off, is what's your big goal in life? And do you have one, or do you not have one? Or is your strategy to just take one step at a time, and then when you look back at your life, 50 years from now, you just be happy with whatever happened? So I'm curious to know if you have a big anchor goal, or you just, kind of, like you said, things change, you're just going to move with the change.
Sure, that's a great question. And I do have a big anchor goal, and I'll give a little bit of background of how I got there. So being from Tanzania, I'm very community focused, and the Tanzanian tech community isn't that huge yet, but it's definitely growing. When I was in my career, I started noticing people who focus on helping communities grow, and I thought that was really cool. And it's something I definitely want to do with the Tanzanian tech community, kind of join other people who are already doing it, folks who currently live in Tanzania, because I don't. And I think of that as my overarching goal, but I've narrowed it down a little bit more, right? So other things I've done during my career, I was part of a group called Dev Color. It's an American-based group for Black software engineers. So when I was a Black software engineer, I would join the group. And it's a really great community. And one of the things that they do is they have you write like a vision for your career, as they do give you a lot of training. There's like a day that you go in and you talk about what are your lifetime goals, what are the things that will lead you there, how does it narrow you down to like a career vision. And I did Dev Color for 3 years, so it kind of changed from year to year. But my vision was to be a technical leader in a community that helps people create technical solutions. I'm paraphrasing a little bit because I haven't like narrated it in a little while. But so far, that's sort of the direction that I want to go in. And it could look like a lot of different things, right? A technical leader, part of that is being a manager, right? I definitely want to work with people, help them. The other part is helping folks find technical solutions. I think that there are a lot of things that we've already fixed, that lessons that can be learned from different people that we just haven't learned yet, specifically in the Tanzanian tech community. So that's one of my overarching goals, to work there, to be a leader that helps people solve their problems. But the steps that I want to take that lead me there look differently, right? To be a good leader, you definitely have to be in a community. So part of my role in DevRel right now is finding out how are you a good member of community? How do you listen to your community and work with them? How do you create content for that community? All of this is sort of leading me in that direction, and I kind of know it, but it's also because those are the types of skills that I want to learn, right? I really enjoy learning these types of things. The other part to that is I was like, if I wanted to go be part of a technical community, having a coding background will help me with that. It don't have to be, but for my path, it did. So that's another part that it kind of fit in. I think the first role that I took, SRE, was the one that was least related to that ending goal. And that was before I kind of thought about that goal. The other part is when you're fresh out of college, you take the first role available to you, unless you have multiple offers, which is a great place to be, and then you pick the best one. But you usually take the first available role, your starting step, right? And that's good. You really need to get your foot in the door somewhere. So if it'll get you there, you'll go up and down, whatever, but getting there is important. That one was probably the least removed from my overarching goal of like creating technical solutions in my home technical community, right? Another part of that goal is just moving to Tanzania. Whether that'll happen right now, who knows? But I'm probably a lot closer to that than I ever was. When I first started out, I was like, okay, let's see how long this student visa will let me work. Then I got a work visa and I was like, okay, now I have more flexibility in being able to go home for a couple months at a time if my role permits. And being permanent real remote is helping me out with that. I'm gonna go home next month and spend some time there, not working on anything. I'll take some time off, but being in this now remote friendly world, I can imagine an opportunity for me where I can be part of a Tanzanian tech community without living there full time. Or I can be part of the American tech community without living here full time. I can move home and still, get that American money because that matters right now. The Tanzanian tech community is not paying me American money, so I'm not ready to move just yet. All of these changes I wasn't initially starting off for, but they're all kind of lining up in that direction.
Cool, thank you. I appreciate that. Any other questions, guys? The students in the house, you guys have questions for us? I'm gonna start picking on people. Jeffrey, do you have a question?
You can also post it in the chat if you don't want to talk. I'm looking at the chat.
Masvita, do you have a question? Bala, I'm picking on people now.
Also, shout out to my mentees who are in this call, Bala and Winifred. Appreciate y'all. We'll chat later. Today is the day that we talk. So if they don't have questions, they want to talk to me later, that's fine.
Okay. I mean, if no one has questions, that's okay. This was really good, Ajuna. And obviously it was recorded, so folks, I'm actually going to send this to my mentees so to make sure that they watch it.
I have a question.
Oh, there's a question. Perfect. Let's go.
How is the transition from different career paths? Is it smooth or difficult? It can be, it varies. I would say that the transition from site reliability engineer to software engineer was very smooth. The reason for that was I stayed in the same company, right? That makes things a lot easier. I didn't have to worry about job searching externally and like doing new coding interviews and stuff. That obviously smooths things out a fair amount. I was just looking for a good manager who was within Google New York at the time, who was open to hiring people at my level. Where career transitions can be more difficult is if you're completely changing companies and titles. So it's transitioning from software engineering to developer relations at a different company was a little hard. I tried doing that internally at Google at first, and there were a lot of challenges there. One, I'd already swapped before, and not in a short period of time, right? 4 years is not a long career to be trying out multiple roles. So there was a part of that at first where it was like, do you have enough time to know. There was also just not a lot of opportunity at the time for that field internally at Google. Part of that was I started looking in the end of 2020 and Google was still like not hiring that many people, especially people whose job it is to go speak at conferences when conferences were basically frozen. So that was also just a bad timing on that part. I was also not wanting to move from New York at the time, so there weren't a lot of opportunities at Google New York to do that. The one that I applied to and got pretty far on, they said to go with someone else because developer relations also, tons of people transition to it at different parts of their career. I actually transitioned to it pretty early. There are coworkers that I have who have been doing SRE for 10 years, then transitioned to DevRel. Other people who really have a ton of experience. I work with people 10, 15, 20 years older than me. And we have different paths, and also they're better at some things than I am, obviously, because of their experience. They also might be aiming to create content for people who are a little more advanced in their career than I am, where really, I want to make it clear, I'm not doing the same work as my coworker who has been working on Kubernetes before it was even just publicly known, right? It's very, very different. So that was a little more of a harder career transition, because then I had to convince people that who had never had this job before that I could do it. So I did a lot of interviewing, a lot of different challenges, a lot of creating content before I went with them and was like, I've done things like this. I've spoken at places like this. So I can do this role at your company. So that was a harder transition. I know also if I transitioned within Google, I would have had to do interviews, because Google has career ladders where they're like, you start at this level, then get promoted, then get promoted. And some careers like SRE and software engineering, they're similar enough because you have the same background as like software engineering, so you can code the same. So transitioning is easy. But another career where you're not coding at all or coding more, you probably have to do interviews and stuff, which was true for me. So that was a harder transition. So I'm going to make it clear that there might be a lot of interviewing, there might be a lot of learning for you to swap careers. So it can be a little bit hard, but I appreciate the choices that I made. The next question is, what are some hard choices that you made to get to where you are in your career? There were a few. I would say in a lot of ways that I'm very fortunate, because I had a lot of flexibility in terms of just my personal circumstance. I was able to make a decision to not live where my parents live and be able to afford doing that, right? I remember one of the hard decisions I made when I was a student was to stay in college in the US and not go home and be with my family so that I could do summer career opportunities, which looking back, it was the right decision to make at the time. But part of me was just like, I remember one summer, it was my first summer that I wouldn't be home. It was my parents' 25th wedding anniversary. They were having this big party and I couldn't be there. And I was just like, okay, I'm making this decision to stay in the US and work so that I could, because I had the opportunity to do so and not go home, which was a hard decision at the time, but it makes sense now. Other hard choices I made was like making the decision that's best for me to match my personal circumstance. Again, for example, choosing Google is not a hard choice, but definitely I might have had more opportunities to learn or more lucrative opportunity if I went with maybe a smaller company or a startup. But I was like, I have to pick the one that will help me out with the most. I've also made wrong decisions. I think that even though it was I don't mind doing software engineering, and I think it's good that I did it when I did it, but also my team changed a lot under me. So I think of that as being a decision I didn't think out enough in terms of the type of team I also wanted to fall into, because also the people you work with and the types of things you do matter. And I was being more intentional about it because I did have some experience, but that decision, my project on that team changed 4 times in like a year and a half. And I want to say you can't get better if the project you're working on continuously, I'm not saying like I'm like working on different part of something. I went from doing C++ to Java to Python in like a year and a half. And I had to consistently learn a different language, the system that we're working in, and these are large scale systems that interact very differently, right? So you're learning a new system from scratch constantly. So I wasn't making progress. I didn't get promoted for a while because the team that I picked kept changing so much and I couldn't get better and stuff. So that was a difficult, bad choice in retrospective, but I did what I think is best at every stage and I don't regret any of the choices. The next question is, could I give a clear roadmap as to how to become a software engineer? So the stuff you should know, the kind of skill set, it feels humongous and overwhelming. Okay. In short, it is. I don't really know the path from electrical engineering to computer science, and learning it by yourself is a little bit more difficult. There are a lot of resources out there, but how to get started is usually, I recommend that people learn a language that's very popular. So for example, at Google, there were 5 main languages that we used. There was Python, Java, C++, JavaScript, and Go. So having one of those popular languages could help you. Any of the flavors of JavaScript, but knowing vanilla JavaScript could help you too. The reason for that is you'll likely work on a team in larger tech companies or tech companies in general that use one of those languages. So knowing it so that you can interview with it, so that you can work on projects with other people who know one of those languages can be really helpful. So knowing one of those languages or more, you can start with one. Another part is to just get used to working on tech. So if something that's super easy, it's easier than a lot of other projects, is you can start with making your own website. That usually gives you a good insight of how to go from an idea to creating a product that other people can see, which can be really helpful. You can work with other folks, you can copy a lot of other people's websites. That's how I got started. You go, you inspect the HTML, you copy the CSS, whatever you're doing, right? Just to get started on a website. You could do it in JavaScript, in React, or whatever you want to do. You can use templates that are out there. I think just getting it's a lower stakes way of getting yourself out there in terms of creating a project that other people will see. If you do that, or you want to do something else, you can get started on working with other people in terms of, if you are in classes, if you can take some computer science classes or software engineering classes, so you can get opportunity to learn coding standards and learn the intricacies of coding with someone else. So these are things like version control, what are they called? Just the general style guides of how to code in a particular language, right? Like how to organize your classes if you're in Java, how to declare objects, things that are visible to other people, things like that, right? Getting an opportunity to work with other folks can be really helpful. It's something we do a lot as software engineers. Other skill sets that software engineers use is how to kind of share your idea with someone else and convince them that it's a good idea. That's writing design docs, and writing is also super helpful, right? So trying to say, here's a problem I see in our project or in our software. This is the thing I want to do to solve that problem. This is how I found out about it. I've considered these other options. So doing some research and convincing someone else. So working with other people can also teach you that skill, which can be helpful. I would say right now, depending on where you are in the world, but generally everywhere, there's a lot of people who want to get started with CS. So I think that I think it was easier for me to get a leg in tech than it is now, because even though a lot more people know about it and a lot more people are open to helping new folks in tech, it also feels like there's a lot of competition in some way. So it can feel a little challenging, but you can keep at it. Showing off the projects that you've done individually and working with other people will show folks you know what you're doing, and having some experience is always helpful. So that's why I'm saying working with other people and doing something yourself can give you a good foot in the door. You can also work on things that you're interested in. You can make a video game if that's what you like. I've seen people figure out how to code with their sewing machine. So you send a program to a sewing machine and you put a cloth and it'll like outline the thing that you've coded or something. There's lots of different things that you can do with the different skill sets that you have. If you like writing a lot, you could write about your different experiences in coding, right? If you've learned a new language, you can write down the things that you've learned. A lot of people do appreciate folks who enjoy sharing knowledge. Whatever way makes the most sense to you, but do something. Start small and it'll kind of snowball as you learn more. Being connected to the community helps too. So find like-minded folks. Twitter is great. I would say out of all the social medias, the tech people are on Twitter. So you can also get a lot of insight from them there. So yeah.
Yeah, and if I could add, Jeffrey, as well, it sounds like you're in college, so take some computer science classes while you're there as well, right? You don't have to be, a computer science major to be able to take advantage of that, but take classes and see if you like some things. Yeah, so that would be my one advice.
Oh yeah, that's super helpful. I work with so many people whose degree is not computer science. You don't have to have a computer science degree to be a software engineer or anything else. Everyone comes from wherever they're at. The skills is what matters, which is helpful. I'm really happy that tech is continuing with that trend and may continue for a while longer. Some people don't have a degree. I will say that can be tricky. So if you're already in college, finish it, just get it done. There are a lot of jobs that I've seen that do say you must have at least a bachelor's degree. Unless you go the path of you build your own thing without your degree and you get acquired by another company. So you like keep going, or your company becomes big enough on its own. That's the recent way I've seen folks who don't have a ton of experience traditionally getting into tech, but.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Ajuna. This was really, really, really helpful.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of you, really. Very excited. I think the mentees on the call, I think they picked one or two things. Again, this is going to be recorded. I'm going to send it to my mentees to watch. So just big thank you. And without any more questions, I guess it is time for us to wrap up. So yeah, thank you.
No problem. And if anyone has more questions, my email is open. I will respond at some. I'm not going to make any promises, but I will respond to you, I promise.
All right, guys. Well, have a great weekend. And for those in the US, have a great Thanksgiving week. We'll catch you guys back again for Africode X in December. Ciao. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Ajuna.